A godly man. Well, what is a godly man? Well, let's look at Christ, who is both man and God. Right from when he was young, when he was about 12, in the temple, everyone's interested in hearing him and his questions and his answers, and we're astonished by him. Right on through to when he started his ministry, when after he called his 12 apostles, there were thousands of people who followed him. And you'll know there's a natural thing about leaders that people naturally follow leaders. And so part of being a godly man, being a good man and a godly man, is not having followers necessarily, but being somebody who people naturally follow. That is the mark of a man. Yeah? Okay. There's a couple of other things to notice about him too. You also see that in Christ is the true fulfillment of loving your neighbour and providing for what everybody needs around him. Not going around going, well, can't help you, sorry. Sorry. No, he's provided exactly what they needed. Raised Lazarus from the dead, and he ultimately fulfilled everything they needed by dying on the cross for their sins. Now, if that isn't the ultimate act of loving your neighbour as yourself, I don't know what is. And it's the ultimate act also of fulfilling loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind. So we'll just see that as some groundwork so we can measure what a man is against these very high standards. Let's first look at family and leadership in the household. Now, it's very difficult in some ways because Christ didn't have a family. Well, he had mother and father and brothers, but he didn't have his own family. But we are adopted to be his own family. So we can look at how he loves and leads us as to what we are to do as men, that is, to do with our families. So he loved us so much that he died on the cross. He gave us what we needed, and he gave us guidance, discipline, and everything else. And discipline is a very big one, and we'll touch on that in a little bit again in a minute. But leading your families, it's a big responsibility here. You've got to have the wisdom and the guidance to be able to do that. Just turning oxygen into carbon dioxide is not leading your family, or going out and getting some money from a job or whatever is not leading your family. Leading your family is providing in spiritual leadership. When your wife needs advice or needs guidance or discipline, or your children need discipline or advice or guidance, they need to be able to look to you. The buck stops with you. You need to be able to provide these things. And they're not necessarily easy. I'm not saying it's easy, just saying you have to be able to provide these things. And they're not easy to do. What does it actually look like? Well, I think it's going to be different in each case. Remember that women were made to help men. They were men's helper. That's why God created them. They were a helpmeet for him. Now that may sound sexist, but there is a very clear structure in the Bible. Excuse me. And the clear structure in the Bible is that men are to serve God, first up. And they are to bring their families along. They are to guide and lead their families in God. And women are supposed to support him in that role. That doesn't mean that he can just slack off and leave her to pick up all his nonsense behind him. No. But that is the structure that we are given in the Bible, whether we like it or not. But there is things that you need to be able to provide financially as well. Not just financially, but physically. Actual practical things you need to be able to provide, not just guidance and ways of doing things. Yeah? So you need to be able to provide money, which is a pretty common thing. No one's arguing about that, whether or not you should be providing money. But there is things you need to be able to provide. Yeah? To the best of your ability. And part of that is not just providing for your own. You should be able to provide for your own and to those in need. Now you might say, well, hey, I don't have the money for that sort of thing. Well, nor do I. But I've been able to provide for those in need with physical things, such as, say, a friend needs a house built and he's doing part of the build himself. It's very common here in this part of the world. And what do? Well, you go out there and you help him. I'm a carpenter when I'm not being a father at home. And what I have to do is sometimes is to do that for a friend or a brother in Christ. Essentially, my neighbours, whoever they are. I'm sure there's more than I even know. And just a quick word on being able to provide for your neighbours. I'm not going to go into it very much now, but there is a lot more to be done there than what the church or most people in the church actually know. The command to love your neighbour as yourself goes a long way further than what people first realise. But like I said, I'm not going to get into that now, but something to consider. Now, let's consider the love of Christ, because that's part of being a good man, is being able to love free and honestly, without expecting anything in return, without demanding, pulling, or contriving in some way, to love free and fully, honestly. Again, not easy to do, but it must be done by the godly man. He must be able to love free and honestly. He must be able to give of his love. He must have an excess of love. Love has no cap. There's no limit to love. It is limitless. And like I say to my kids, you don't lose something by giving love to someone else. Just because someone else is getting love does not mean that you have lost love or anything else for that matter. And if anything, you've gained. You do not lose by loving someone else. You cannot lose unless you're expecting something back, unless you're loving from a place of selfishness. Then you will lose. And hence the reason that's not love. It's not love at all. It's selfishness, pretending to be love. So in conclusion, really, to be the godly man, we have to step up, follow Christ, and love free and honestly, and guide and protect those who God has entrusted to us. Have a good one.